Thank you, Rajlakshmi, and good afternoon, everybody. So today we are having another important session of gastrointestinal symptoms. Previously, Dr. Pankaj taken nausea and vomiting. So today we will have intestinal obstruction, which is one of the common complications of advanced malignancy, and constipation, which is another important aspect which is often neglected by professionals. So Dr. Sridevi Vaidya, who is a palliative care physician in Pallium India, will be talking to you about this. She has done her MSc in palliative medicine from Cardiff University, and she has been practicing palliative care for more than 5 years, and she has also research interest. So welcome Sridevi, and it's over to you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Thank you all the participants for having me again in another role. We have been seeing each other in the beginning for some time. Is my voice clear, Raju?
Yes, ma'am, it is. Ma'am,
Okay.
just want to ask, you're starting with
Yeah.
constipation slides, right?
Constipation. Yes. I kept everything ready in another laptop, but I don't know why it is not opening in that. Thank you. Thank you. So today we'll be talking about two symptoms, very important symptoms, often overlooked, that are constipation and malignant bowel obstruction. So I'll be starting with constipation, and this picture looks very funny, but this is what happens actually inside a patient's body. They are always in a constant conflict, who wants to move and who wants to move next. So today's session will be dealing with what is constipation, why it is important to talk about constipation, and what are the causes of constipation and assessment of constipation. Why do we need to assess constipation? Next slide. So whenever we have a session on constipation, I usually, at least some of the participants used to wonder, why do we have a separate session just on constipation? But when you start seeing patients in palliative care, you can see how important it is to deal with constipation, because many of the symptoms linger around the problems connected with constipation. So what exactly is constipation? Is it just complete obstruction, like non-passage of stools? No, it is a passage of small volume feces infrequently and with difficulty. So it can be the patient will be passing stools almost regularly, but it may be infrequent or passing with difficulty. And important words I should stress in terms of constipation would be persistent, difficult, infrequent, or seemingly incomplete defecation. So if any of this come to you, a patient has come to you with any of this issue, then we can think about constipation. Next slide. So this is, I should say, which is one of the most mismanaged or overlooked symptom. We generally don't ask about constipation. Whenever patients tell you constipation, usually the caregivers will interfere. No, he's going to toilet every now and then. He goes multiple times. He thinks that he's not opening. So either we tell them, oh, that is okay, that is fine. We tend to ignore constipation very often. And there are a lot of misconceptions in connection to constipation. The first one, even I have seen many doctors telling that as you are not eating, it is okay that you don't have the proper stools regularly. It is a very common misconception that I'm not having solid diet, I'm just having juices and soups and gruels, so I'm not opening my bowel properly. That is fine because I have a lot of urine output, not bowel. That is a very common misconception. What are the other psychological factors which we tend to ignore? Many a times when they are admitted in a hospital, when there is a crowded ward, or some people, when we go out of home, we can't have a proper bowel opening till we come back home and have in our own toilet, right? So lack of privacy, the patient will be given a bedpan, everyone will be looking around, a nurse will be keeping the bedpan, uh, which is quite strange, because I am losing control over my own small thing like a bowel opening or a bladder control, and along with that I'm losing my privacy, which can lead to severe constipation. Sometimes we ourselves overlook the side effects of medications that we give. We know that certain medications can cause constipation, but we think it is okay. Let's see whether constipation develops, and then we can prescribe laxatives. Very, very commonly, when we get patients referred from non-palliative care, I'm not blaming anyone, but it is very common to see prescriptions of opioids without a prescription of laxative, and the patient stops taking opioids. I just had that 2 days back, and one of my friend forwarded me a prescription given by a medical oncologist for her mom, who's having primarily complaining of constipation. And I asked her what all medications you are taking. She's on 2 different opioids, which is quite strange. Along with that, there is no laxative, and the patient is struggling because of distension and colicky abdominal pain. Next would be suboptimal use of suboptimal use of laxatives. Sometimes we prescribe laxatives, but then we give a little bit lower dose, or even if we prescribe optimum dose, patients are worried about loose stools, having had to go to bathroom several times, had taken by someone several times. What if I develop loose stool? So they take suboptimal dose of laxatives. And sometimes they come with atypical presentation. Sometimes they tell you symptoms of dyspepsia. They come up with urinary retention or urinary tract infection, and sometimes with delirium. So then we don't generally think about constipation as the primary issue there. And very commonly they come up with overflow diarrhea, or we call as spurious diarrhea. They come with the presentation of loose stools for many days, and they might have seen someone and taken something to stop the loose stools, and they end up in very severe constipation. Next slide. So this is a Rome criteria, which is commonly used, not in all clinical setting, but if you are doing a research activity where you actually want to document constipation, or you want to be sure whether you are dealing with constipation, this is a standard criteria for constipation assessment. It should satisfy at least 2 or more of the following. First would be straining during at least 25% of defecation. So most of the time the patient has to strain to pass the motion, or a sensation of anorectal obstruction during at least 25% of defecation, lumpy or hard stools at least 25% of the time. Sometimes they say it's like very stony, hard, small lumps they are passing, then you should suspect constipation. Lesser than 3 bowel movements per week. So if the patient is fulfilling at least 2 or more than of this criteria, we can say that patient is having constipation. Next slide. So why should we worry about constipation? Why too much stress on just a simple topic of constipation? Because in advanced disease, it can cause, next. So it can cause colicky abdominal pain. As I told about my friend's mom, she just had severe colicky pain, and when I inquired more about it, she was having severe chronic constipation, like many days. Along with that, she was started with opioids without a laxative, and it can lead to anorexia. People already stop eating because of a lot of reasons when they have all this cancer treatment, and this can contribute to more of the anorexia. Nausea, vomiting, very commonly seen when they have improper bowel opening for a long period of time. Retention of urine, very commonly seen, but we don't generally relate that to constipation. The moment you hear the patient is telling you that I have retention of urine which suddenly developed, I would generally ask about the bowel movement, because a loaded rectum can cause obstruction of urine outflow. Anxiety, and again along with anxiety I would add depression also, because for depression, constipation is one of the main symptom which patients tell you. Constipation can cause confusion and delirium in elderly patients. So this is why we give a lot of stress in management of constipation. Next slide. So what are the causes of constipation? Next, you can show the complete slide. So there are a lot of pharmacological causes. You can see most of the drugs that we use, including anti-epileptics for pain management, antacids, some of the antiemetics like ondansetron. We use a lot of anticholinergic drugs for various symptom management. Most of these drugs can cause constipation. Opioids, very commonly used. many a times antidepressants. So these are the pharmacological causes for constipation. What are the metabolic causes? Most of the patients will be dehydrated. They don't drink well, or they can't drink well when they are approaching advanced illness. And when patients having multiple bone metastasis, they will be having hypercalcemia. And hypokalemia is not uncommon in our patient population. So these are the metabolic reasons for constipation. Neurological issues. So sudden development of urinary retention and constipation, you can always think about a malignant spinal cord compression or a nerve infiltration from the tumor. Structural, there can be tumors in the large tumors in the pelvis causing obstruction, or there can be radiation induced fibrosis. There can be another any other type of painful anorectal condition. Already the patient will be having some history of hemorrhoids, or so any anorectal condition can contribute to constipation. As I mentioned earlier, depression is very prone to have constipation. One of the major symptoms that patients tell you when they are depressed, when you ask about hopelessness, helplessness and all, one major symptom would be constipation. Next slide. Diet. Many of the patients, we tell them take more of fluid and fibers and stuff. It is good to tell, but in terms of advanced illness, they are unable to take even sips of fluid. So we cannot stress more on fluid and fiber intake. So a diet can be another reason. Many of these patients will have diabetes and hypothyroidism, which already will be contributing to the existing cancer or any other illness they have. All of them will be, most of them will be immobile or inactive. So you know that decreased activity and immobility can contribute to difficulty in bowel opening. And inability to obey the call. As I said, we can imagine when we are traveling in a train, we don't go to toilets very often, even though you have to go to the toilet. So in some patients, when they are in a hospital, when they are dependent on anybody else for this bowel opening, you can imagine how difficult it would be. So even if they want to pass stools, they may not be because of the psychological and other privacy issues. Next slide. So what are the common causes of constipation in palliative care? I would stress very, very commonly opioids. Opioids, more than 97% of patients can have constipation because of opioids. Any kind of opioids. People think that tramadol is okay because it's a weak opioid, but it is not as weak as in causing constipation, nausea, and vomiting side effects of opioid. So any opioids, as I mentioned, the same thing, dehydration, reduced mobility, hypercalcemia when patients having multiple bone metastasis, any neurological issues causing nerve infiltration or any other pathology causing obstruction. Drugs that we commonly use, anticholinergics, ondansetron, and many of the antacids, especially the one with aluminum salts in it. Next slide. So how do morphine cause constipation? We have heard about this in the session for morphine, but I'm just mentioning just the points. It decreases the propulsive intestinal activity, by it also it increases the non-propulsive activity. So bowel, the intestinal activity, the propulsions become really slowed down. So what happens? There will be additional time available for more and more water reabsorption, which causes the stools to harden. And there is inhibition of secretory motor neurons. So less fluid enter the gut. So already you have more water reabsorption, and along with that, less fluid enters the gut, and along with decreased in all the propulsive activity. And it also reduces the sensation of rectal distension. So what happens? You don't feel the distension, so there is no urge to have the bowel opening, so that it can cause fecal impaction. Next. Next. So how will we assess constipation? During our rounds or any home visits, the very, very important question, along with pain, the next question will be asking about the bowel opening. When did the patient's bowel last move? Don't stop by that, because the patient will tell you, today morning I had a bowel opening. Ask about the stool consistency. Was it hard, lumpy stools? Like, was it stony hard? What was the volume? was it adequate, or was there any blood or mucus in the stool? How could you pass it? Did you have to strain in a lot to pass the stools? And did you have incomplete sensation of incomplete emptying? Very, very important question. The caregiver tend to tell you, no, 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 he's opening every day, he's going every day, but ask, do you feel satisfied when you have a proper bowel opening? Whether there is any incontinence, do you feel that there is a leakage, often soiling your clothes? So ask about this. So it's very important to ask in detail. Don't just stop with when was your last bowel opening, but ask in detail about the consistency, volume, difficulty to pass, and very importantly, were you satisfied with your bowel opening? Was there any incomplete emptying? Next slide. So this is one of the important chart that can be used in a clinical setting. If the patient, if you are unable to ask, or if your patient is unable to tell you how they felt, or they are unable to understand what you are asking, just show this chart. You can just easily put an image in your mobile phone when you are going for home care and just show them. So you can see the consistency type 1 to 7. So they can easily point out which kind of stool or which kind of consistency they had in terms of bowel opening. Next slide. So if you're suspicious, examine the oral cavities, check for dehydration, check for oral thrush. Very importantly, they don't, whenever they have dehydration or whenever they have any gastrointestinal symptoms, usually there can be oral thrush. So check the oral cavity thoroughly, examine the abdomen and listen for bowel sounds. This is really important. Examine for any fecolates or any tumor mass you feel that can be contributing, and check whether there is a impaired or increased bowel sounds. Do gentle rectal examination, and only if the patient doesn't have a threat of bleeding, or there any lesion in the rectum, do a gentle rectal examination. I must say, when we talk about pain, we tell that to believe the patient when they say they have pain. But in terms of constipation, I make it a point that I never believe the patient, because sometimes and the caregivers, of course, because they feel that they are just drinking juices or water, so it is okay not to have proper bowel opening because I'm not having solid. So it's really important to probe a lot and keep a suspicion all the time that this can be constipation. If needed, abdominal x-ray. We have had strange instances of patients referred to us by a I think a surgeon. She was on pain treatment for quite a long period of time, taking a lot of neuropathic pain medication. I'm not exaggerating, but she underwent an intervention for her lower abdominal pain, and ultimately she was referred to Dr. Rajgopal for expert opinion because they could not achieve satisfactory pain control. And on examination, I could feel the fecolith, and we admitted her, managed her bowel for a week because it took a long period of time to evacuate the complete impacted stools inside. And quite surprisingly, she was relieved of all the symptoms. And it was quite a shocking thing for us also, because we thought it is sent by they have done a lot of interventions and still she has pain. So we thought, okay, let's do this first and then think about the next step. So with a proper bowel opening regime, she had a good pain relief. So it's not a simple symptom, and don't trust the patient when they say they had bowel opening. Next slide. Always have the suspicion. Rectal examination, be very careful and very gentle, because no one wants to have a rectal examination in the first place. Definitely prepare, tell them what you're going to do and what you're going to achieve, so they know what exactly is going to happen. Next slide. Use plenty of lubricants, plenty of lubricants, and this check for all this. I know that you must be knowing all this. I'm just going through the points. If the rectum is empty and collapses, it indicates a functioning bowel. You know that. If the rectum is empty and dilated, you feel a large space uh, around it, then you know that the fecal matter is impacted high up in the bowel. And if you feel there is a balloony rectum or feels ballooned, again, you can see you have a lot of space around your finger, it indicates a gross constipation. If you can feel the feces in the rectum, just check for the consistency. If it is hard stool and impacted stool, you can manage accordingly. You can have a digital rectal evacuation if needed. Check whether you are touching a tumor or a fecal mass. If the surface is irregular, hard and immobile, then you will be touching a tumor. After you examine, Use plenty of lubricants, plenty of lubricants. Make them relax, make them breathe properly. Explain to them what you're going to do. Examine your fingertip after you do a rectal examination. Examine what you have in your fingertip, whether it is a fecal matter or a bleeding tip, whatever you are getting. Next slide. So this is very important. Prevention is the key for managing constipation. Whenever you write, you have heard the sentence, I think from the beginning, the hand that charts morphine should chart the laxatives. The moment you write morphine, make it mandate that next step should be writing laxative. Then only you go to the adjuvants or the nausea, vomiting part or anything. The moment you write morphine, write a laxative. Write the appropriate laxative. Next slide. So what are the non-pharmacological management? Assess daily. Ask every day you go for rounds. Ask about bowel opening every day. Every single rounds you ask about constipation. Improve the mobility as much as possible. Access to toilet facility. So whenever so it's very commonly seen in our setting that the toilet will be out of the house and they can't get out without anyone else's help. So we can solve the problem by giving a commode chair near the coat so that patient can just get up and have a good bowel opening. Adequate privacy is also there. So the access to toilet facility is one important thing. You give all the laxatives and then they don't have access to toilet, then that is a cruel thing to do. Prompt response to patient call. So that is something with the caregiver education. Ensure privacy. Put a screen or something when they are in a ward and when they want to have a bowel opening. Diet and fluid intake, there is much restriction in terms of palliative care patients because we can't stress much on diet and fluid intake. Ask about other symptoms like delirium or urinary retention or infections. Next slide. So how do you classify laxatives? There are major classifications are the bulk forming laxatives, fecal softeners, which will obviously soften the fecal matter, osmotic laxatives, stimulant laxatives, and other which can actually help in proper bowel opening. So the bulk forming laxative, I'm not reading through all the drugs because anyway I'm going into detail. Next slide. So bulk forming laxative, what it increases the bulk, it increases the fecal mass. So thereby it induces the peristalsis. But what happens in our patient population or an elderly patient, they need to drink extra fluids, which may not be possible. And it can actually worsen the constipation because if suppose the patient is on morphine, so the motility is reduced and you have added the bulk also. So it can actually worsen the existing constipation. Next slide. Osmotic laxatives, very commonly used one, lactulose. It's non-absorbable sugars, usually given when you suspect any bacterial growth, especially in hepatic encephalopathy patients. It exerts an osmotic influence, causing water retention in the lumen, thereby enhancing the proper bowel opening. It can cause dehydration because of its osmotic influence and can cause cramping and nausea. Initial years, osmotic laxatives were not indicated in palliative care patients, but the recent formulary has come up with osmotic laxative as the one of the drug of choice for uh, morphine-induced constipation. Next slide. Softeners, fecal softeners. This will soften the fecal matter, but it cannot be used as a laxative alone because it just softens. You need something to push the fecal matter out. So better to combine with the stimulant laxative. Next slide. I think nowadays it comes as a combination of the stimulant and the softener in Crimafin Plus, which has both stimulant and a softener. So the drug of choice for morphine-induced constipation, it is a combination of stimulant laxative and a softener. Definitely a stimulant laxative, and if needed, you can add a softener. That is what we follow. Stimulant laxative would be Dwisacodil. It has a direct action on the myenteric plexus and the submucosal plexus. It has both motor and secretory action. And if you are respecting a complete obstruction, it can cause pain. So it should be it can cause pain and other complications. So it should be avoided in complete obstruction. So this is a drug of choice for morphine-induced constipation. Next slide. So this should be, I can say, prescription of a laxative. The first step should be giving bisacodyl 10 milligram HS plus or minus. You can check whether they, if a patient is telling me I already have a constipation, I would add softener in the first visit itself, or I would wait for the next follow up whether they have adequate bowel opening. If not, you can increase to 5, 5, 10 along with or without a softener, and then you can increase up to 10, 10, 10 per day without softener. So I would add softener, asking them about whether it is difficulty to pass the, is it more of a strain to open the bowel, or is it more of a hardness of the stool that is causing problem. Then you can have the rectal measures in the fourth step, which would be digital rectal evacuation. You can give suppositories and low or high enema. If the patient is having a balloony rectum, that means the fecal matter is impacted high up in the bowel, then you have to have a high up enema. There we use a suction catheter attached to your normal enema tube, and use plenty of lubricants or the local anesthetic. Pass the tube as gently as possible as till you reach a point where you feel an obstruction, and then administer enema there. So you are actually trying to bypass the loaded part and then giving the enema there. There is no, if you are having a balloony rectum, there is no point in giving a normal enema, which is a low enema, which may not be beneficial. Next slide. So what is a spurious or overflow diarrhea? Sudden onset of diarrhea after a period of constipation, very, very commonly seen in palliative care patients. They come to you with complaining of diarrhea, and then you start managing the diarrhea. This is suggestive of a chronic constipation and fecal impaction. In this case, I would definitely ask, when was the last proper bowel opening? So they may say, okay, I had a constipation for a week, then suddenly I started having all this diarrhea. So that means you should suspect a fecal impaction. You should do a digital rectal examination and evacuation, followed by, if needed, a high up, definitely needed a high up enema, and then regularization of a laxatives. Next slide. So conclusion, it is not a disease, it is a symptom. No laxative work if you don't give enough, or you do not give it at all. So you have to give enough amount of laxative. All laxatives work, but adverse effects and palatability. Sometimes patients don't like the liquid preparations at all. So it depends on patient to patient. Usually we need a combination of a stimulant and a softener. In our setting, we have kept it mandatory that you should have an adequate bowel opening at least once in 3 days. So if the patient is constipated for 2 days, we make sure that there is a bowel opening in the 3rd day. Even in a home care setting or in an IP setting, we make sure that the bowel is opened well on the 3rd day, not more than 2 days. Next slide. So can we just start the bowel obstruction slide, Arun? I sent it as 2 PPTs. That's why. I'll take the questions in the end regarding constipation. Next slide. So there are a lot of context in which we can explain this this bowel obstruction, but today we will be focusing more on signs and symptoms with the radiographic evidence and obstructing the transit of GI contents, usually related to cancer and anti-cancer treatment. So today we'll be focusing more around cancer and anti-cancer treatment related bowel obstruction, because there are a lot of other situations where you can have a bowel obstruction. Next slide. So this is a very difficult area, I must say, because the symptoms varies from patient to patient, sometimes no symptoms to very severe symptoms as soon as they report to you. And the approach to management is really logical, I must say. Depends on the symptoms. We have to tailor the management. Next slide. So it is mostly seen in advanced stages of cancer. And when you see a bowel obstruction, we can see that the expected median survival would be around less months, maybe 1 to 3 months. So that is a warning sign for us, as well as a point to communicate about the prognosis. It can occur anywhere from the anywhere in the GIT, from esophagus to the rectum. Usually, very commonly, the most common site would be small bowel. It is very commonly seen, I must say, 42% associated with gynecological cancers, mostly with the advanced CA ovary, and followed by a colon cancer, up to 4.4 to 24% in colon cancer. We see bowel obstruction in other cancers also, like in breast, gastric, or lung or pancreatic cancers. Next slide. So what are the different types of bowel obstruction? Just for understanding, because when you know what are the different types, then when patient is telling you, then you can differentiate what can it be actually. So it can be mechanical obstruction or a functional obstruction. It can be a partial obstruction where you still have chances of reversibility, or it can be a complete obstruction. Obstruction can be single site or a multiple site, and depending on the single or multiple site, ideally the treatment options varies also in terms of surgical management. It can be intraluminal or intramural. Intraluminal, where you know that the tumor is growing inside, obstructing the lumen. Intramural, where there is infiltration of intestinal muscles as well. There can be extrinsic obstruction from outside, as in cases of gynecological cancers, it is usually seen as extrinsic obstruction. Next slide. Obstruction can be due to treatment also, because there post-surgery there can be adhesions from the surgery. Some of the chemotherapeutic agents, they can cause reactions which can cause desmoplastic reactions. Torsions can cause obstruction-like symptoms and internal hernias. Next slide. Very rarely we can see intestinal pseudo obstruction because when the tumor is infiltrating or distracting the enteric neurons, we can see pseudo obstruction where you have all the symptoms of obstruction, but it is not per se due to the obstruction of a tumor mass. It can be due to drugs causing severe ileus or diabetic neuropathy. Next slide. So we'll move on to the pathogenesis of bowel obstruction. I'm sure many of you must already know this, but I'll just go through it. So whenever there is an occlusion in the lumen, it will prevent or delays the propulsion of contents to pass distally. So there is an obstruction. This accumulation of contents, whenever there is an accumulation, the bowel try to pass the obstruction. Whenever there is a block, the bowel itself tries to pass the obstruction, which can cause colicky pain. At this stage, it can be reversible most often. But what happens, the bowel keeps contracting, trying to overcome the obstruction, and the contents may pass or may not pass in an uncoordinated way, because there is an obstruction and the bowel is desperately trying to overcome that obstruction. So there can be uncoordinated movements. Sometimes it can pass the bowel content, sometimes it may not. This causes more and more distension. More distension means more and more secretion. So this becomes a vicious cycle. More distension, more secretion, again that is contributing to more of the obstruction. And then again the bowel is trying to overcome that obstruction. So it is like a vicious cycle. So whenever there is an accumulation or an obstruction, there is increase in bacterial flora. Can you change the slide? So whenever there is a obstruction, there is increase in bacterial flora, which can produce gases in the small intestine. Again, it is causing distension and pain. And consequently, there will be an inflammatory response, because you have a bacterial overgrowth there due to the existing pooling of secretions and everything. So inflammatory response means there will be activation of COX pathway, which cause inflammation, release inflammatory mediators. This will cause edema and hyperemia. So everything will add on to the existing obstruction. So there will be bowel wall edema due to the inflammatory response to the bacterial overgrowth, which will further deteriorate the existing issues. And there can be, so these are the metabolic and septic complications. Whenever there is an obstruction, there is decreased venous drainage. So there is an obstructed part and an unobstructed part. So there is decreased venous drainage from the obstructed segment, which will cause hypoxia. Can you change the slide? Sorry, just the last one, previous one. Yeah. So whenever there is a obstruction in the venous drainage from the obstructed area, there is a hypoxia. So what happens? Then there is a redistribution of blood flow between the obstructed segment and the other sites. So there is alterations in the Spankling blood flow, which can lead to multi-organ failure. multi-organ failure syndrome, which is very commonly seen in the late stage of bowel obstruction. And whenever there is a hypovolemic state, which can cause functional renal failure, because there is a decreased renal blood flow. So it can cause a functional renal failure. And as I mentioned, there can be dehydration, which can cause oliguria and hemoconcentration. When the obstruction is high level, there will be stasis of biliary, pancreatic, intestinal, and gastric secretions, which can cause the metabolic issues like hypochloremia, hyponatremia, hypokalemia. Everything will come to the play whenever there is a high level obstruction, because there is a stasis of all the secretions. And as there is there can be sepsis from all these complications, there can be acidosis, metabolic acidosis also. There is increased in the abdominal distension. When there is high level obstruction, the abdominal distension will be more, which will impair the pulmonary ventilation as a result of elevation of diaphragm. So diaphragm will be elevated, which cause decreased pulmonary ventilation. And again, there will be passage of toxins, because you know that there is a bacterial overgrowth happening there. There is passage of toxins through the intestinal wall to the lymphatic and systemic circulation, causing sepsis. So there is a whole lot of complication. So it acts as a cycle. Once you start the cycle, it keep aggravating one and the other. So these are the consequences of malignant bowel obstruction. Next slide. So there's a rule of thumb: higher the obstruction, more the symptoms and less will be the signs. Lower the obstruction, less symptoms and more sign. Next slide. So so once a few years back, we had Robert Twycross visiting us in Pallium. So we had a patient with bowel obstruction, and we were very eager to hear something from him. So he told, then I'll talk to you about bowel obstruction. So then the way he was explaining the bowel obstruction to the patient, obviously he needed a translator, but the way he was explaining the bowel obstruction to the patient was very, very, very clear. So from that day onwards, I try to use that example when I want to tell this to the patient. So he told that imagine a blocked wash basin in your home. So when you have a blocked wash basin, suppose the block is just at the outlet. The moment you start washing your hands, or you start spitting or whatever in the wash basin or the sink, the moment you start using that, you can see that the contents are not going down. You'll have accumulation of all the wastewater in your sink or wash basin. So the moment you start having obstruction in a higher level, you have more of the symptoms and there will be less of signs. And if so the patient was telling us that I think having dinner is a problem, because I can eat anything in the morning and the afternoon, everything. Then the moment I take dinner, then I start vomiting. So I stopped taking dinner. So then he was explaining that when the obstruction is at a lower level, suppose the block of the wash basin, your block is at the outlet, like at a very, very distal site. So you can wash your hands in the morning and the afternoon till evening, everything is fine. The moment that you start washing at night, then all the contents start accumulating, and then only you will notice, okay, there is an obstruction and all the water gets pooled up in the sink. So it was very easy for the patient to understand the concept of the wash basin and the block, and why she is not vomiting during the daytime and why she is vomiting at the night, because everything is getting accumulated and coming up later. So it was very easy for the patient to understand. And the signs and symptoms depends on the site of obstruction. In the outlet obstruction, early and severe nausea and vomiting. And in small bowel obstruction, you can see more of a cramping, because there is a lot of accumulation happening before it comes out with nausea and vomiting. Next slide. So in large bowel obstructions, as I said, the symptoms appear really later. There will be considerable distension and I don't know what I was supposed to write there. So there will be considerable distension there. And there will be diarrhea because of bacterial overgrowth, because the contents are remaining there for a longer period of time. Next slide. So there can be pain in malignant bowel obstruction. There can be two types of pain. One would be a continuous dull aching pain, which is kind of background pain that they usually say. And there is a crampiform pain, which they say that it happens mostly after any intake, either water or any meals. So there can be background pain and a crampiform pain. Next slide. And the first symptom would be pain. The next symptom would be nausea and vomiting. In large bowel obstruction, you can see fecal matter vomiting, but in case of small bowel or a gastric outlet obstruction, we can see that the vomiters will be more of a biliary in nature. And it is very important to ask the patient about the nature of vomiters, the volume and the nature, whether they are vomiting out the undigested particles the moment they take, how long does it take to come back, what all things pass down, what all things come back. So it's very important to ask everything. Next slide. Constipation, we heard about constipation. Ask whether they are able to pass gas, flatus. That is very, very important to differentiate whether they have a complete obstruction or a partial obstruction. Check for, sometimes they may say, I can hear a lot of noise inside my tummy. Next slide. So these are the signs and symptoms. I have given it in a table so that everyone can understand in a better way, and it is easy. Proximal and distal obstruction. So in terms of proximal obstruction, the symptoms will be really early because the wash basin get blocked in the morning itself, and you have a periumbilical pain, and there will be more of a short intermittent cramping pain. But in terms of distal obstruction, the pain comes later. Usually it will be deep visceral pain, and there will be long intervals between the cramp. It is very important to ask these symptoms in detail so you can easily differentiate where can be the obstruction, what would be your management in this. Vomiting in proximal obstruction, large amount, it's not really foul odor. They say that undigested food, the moment I take tea, the tea is coming out. It is not like fresh food coming out. Not much foul odor, but in terms of distal obstruction, foul odor would be present and it takes a little bit longer time to come out. Distension of abdomen, which is usually absent in terms of proximal obstruction, but abdominal distension is very common when you have a distal obstruction. Constipation may or may not be may not be present in proximal obstruction, but in terms of distal obstruction, you can see a long-standing constipation. Next slide. So it's really an emergency. Ideally, you should start talking about this part of. Ideally, you should start talking about prevention of constipation, not linking diet and fluid and everything to the constipation. So the moment they have the if you are telling the patient early enough, the moment they start having constipation, nausea, vomiting, and pain, they come to you and tell that, doctor, you were telling about, make sure that about constipation. So I think I have a constipation or nausea and vomiting, and I think there is a blockage inside. And evaluate their overall status. Whatever management you are planning, it should depend on where the patient is standing at the illness trajectory and what is the goal of care. Address the symptoms. So we were mentioning about few symptoms: pain, nausea, vomiting, constipation, and distension. Make sure that you address all of these symptoms. If needed, you can check the blood for electrolytes and other stats. Next slide. So very abdominal X-rays are around 60% sensitive to malignant bowel obstruction. You can see a difference in air fluid levels and sometimes air-filled distended bowel loops. Next slide. Usually an erect X-ray, erect abdomen. In proximal obstruction, it is not really useful, but in distal obstruction, you can see dilated bowel loops and difference in air fluid levels. It is very useful in ruling out constipation, which may be causing a pseudo obstruction. Constipation solely can cause an obstruction. So this is very helpful. Around 60% sensitivity in plain X-ray abdomen. Next slide. So this is a supine and erect. I think it's better to have an erect abdominal X-ray in ruling out of bowel obstruction. Next slide. CT scans are very useful, 100% sensitivity, and specificity is also really good. And you can locate where exactly the bowel obstruction is, whether it is malignant, pseudo, benign, everything you can differentiate when you are going for a CT scan. It helps in decision making whether the patient needs surgery, whether the patient needs any other endoscopic intervention or just palliation. And we can see whether the area, about the area around the obstruction, whether there is any adhesions or any edema, any other mass, everything. But it depends on, as I said, whatever management and investigation you're planning, it purely depends on at what stage of illness trajectory the patient is in. As we say that malignant obstruction is a very poor prognostic factor. Next slide. So come to the management. Next. Uh, uh, Everything starts with the non-pharmacological management. Check the oral cavity, check for dehydration, check for oral thrush. Tell them to take small sips, not a glass full or half glass, nothing. Just offer ice to suck so that they keep the oral cavity really moist and they can have sips of food and fluid if they can. If the patient is dehydrated and not really dying, then you can think about a IV hydration initially. And if you're thinking about a long-term maintaining hydration, then subcutaneous fluid would be the choice, not IV. If you want to treat the dehydration in a patient who is not imminently dying, I'm stressing more on that, then you can have an IV hydration. But if you're planning for maintaining hydration for a long term, then prefer subcutaneous fluids. Choose the route of administration, because the patient may be having a lot of vomiting, and then you give an oral tablet for pain management may not work because the patient will vomit out everything. And think about where exactly the opioids are getting absorbed, and then think where the obstruction is, and then decide upon the route of administration. Next slide. Reduce pain, usually opioids, and as I mentioned, think about the route. If the patient is unable to swallow anything and continuously vomiting, you cannot give an oral tablet, definitely. So you can think about subcutaneous route if they are admitted, a continuous infusion if needed. If they are not admitted and they are at home, then you can think about a rectal route, or if they can afford, you can think about transdermal patches also. And depend on whether the patient's pain is stable. Steroids is one of the wonder drug in when it comes to management of bowel obstruction, and antispasmodic. So these are the three drugs usually used in treatment of pain in bowel obstruction. Next slide. Dexamethasone is the drug of steroid in the management of bowel obstruction. 8 to 16 milligram is up to 24 milligram is kind of similar effect in terms of managing bowel obstruction. We usually give a 3-day trial and check whether it is actually helping the patient. The main aim is to reduce the bowel wall edema so that you are making a space through which the bowel contents can actually pass. Next. So then it's like literally I imagine when I manage bowel obstruction that I'm trying to remove a traffic block. So you gave dexamethasone so that there is some space in the side road, and then you give a prokinetic so that through the side road small vehicles can pass, at least scooters or bicycles can pass. So we give a metoclopramide trial. Check for colicky pain the moment you start having metoclopramide, because if you are not sure about whether it is complete or partial obstruction, ask the patient whether you have a pain when after you start the metoclopramide. Start with 10 milligram TDS. Check for any gut colic. If patient is telling you I have more pain, stop immediately, and better to monitor the patient when you start metoclopramide. Next slide. For complete obstruction, or okay, you have tried with dexamethasone and the prokinetic, again you feel that there is a complete obstruction not resolving with the above measures in 1 or 2 days of trial, then you focus on treating symptoms and bypassing the obstruction. You may not be able to reverse the obstruction. Next slide. To reduce the secretion, we use hyacinth butyl bromide, the Buscopan injections. It can go anywhere from 40 to 240 milligram. We generally don't have to go up to 240 usually, but it can range from 40 to 240 milligram per day subcutaneously. Ranitidine infusions are proven to be very effective in reducing the secretions in bowel obstruction. It can be like 200 milligram per day as continuous infusions. Octreotide is another commonly used drug in treating bowel obstruction. It reduces the volume of vomiting. It recirculates the splanchnic circulation. It is usually used for high volume vomiters. It can range anywhere from 100 to 600 microgram per day. Bolus doses generally don't work. If you're planning to start this octreotide, then it should be given as a continuous subcutaneous infusion. Next slide. For nausea and vomiting, we can use haloperidol if not controlled with, because we know that now it is a complete obstruction, then you can move on to, we cannot give metoclopramide because it may be causing a colic. So we can move on to haloperidol, anywhere from 2.5 to 5 milligram per day. I have not used promethazine. Usually it settles with haloperidol or dexamethasone. So promethazine 25 milligram TDS subcutaneous. Next slide. For constipation, as we said, gentle rectal measures, or check with small doses of softener whether there is any colic or anything. So it can cause colic. So just check with one dose whether patient is having discomfort, or if no discomfort, you can give laxative. But then if there is discomfort, you can try gentle rectal measures. That's it. Next slide. Surgical options, complete resection, creating a stoma, debulking surgery, whatever surgical options are there, the primary intention would be to improve quality of life or and symptoms, because sometimes the gastrosurgeons, when they know the concept of improving quality of life or just giving symptom relief, they may agree to give a debulking operation or creating a diversion stoma, so that patient can be symptom free, not increasing the longevity but just symptom free. Next slide. Invasive area intervention management, insertion of NG tube, not for a long term, not for feeding, but if the patient is having high volume vomitus and if you want to get relief from the secretions, you can aspirate the contents with an NG tube, but I prefer not to put the NG tube in place, because then it becomes a feeding tube. Then more and more of feeding, more and more of symptoms. It is usually useful in proximal malignant bowel obstruction. It is a very temporary measure. It is to vent GI secretions, not for feeding or not for keeping for a long period of time. And again, we need a patient's permission because it can cause discomfort. Next slide. Other interventional treatment would be venting gastrostomy. And when I was working with the team, oncology team, and none of the surgeons would want to do the venting gastrostomy, because they say it generally they don't want to take up, usually the patients will be very poor performance scale, and they may not be a candidate for the surgery, but it can give relief of symptoms. It needs actually, when you refer, the surgeon needs to have a good idea about that it is just for giving symptom relief. Next slide. Stenting, many of them don't like stenting because of the high rate of failure. Usually, if it is, they do it only if there is a single site obstruction. It will help to reduce the edema and relieve obstruction. So all of this management depends on where exactly the patient is on the illness trajectory. Whether he is in an advanced stage, I would not prefer any of this, except maybe I may vent out some of the secretions using NG tube. So it clearly depends on where exactly the patient stands. Next slide. About TPN, many of the doctors would prefer TPN because the patient caregivers would want nutrition. It is justified in patients, only in patients with minimal tumor burden, and suppose they are waiting for a definite surgery, patient is unable to swallow, after 2 days they are waiting for a definitive surgery and good performance scale, it can be given for a short period of time. That is the only place where I feel it is justified. Next slide. It is usually, as I said, when the patient is waiting for a good management and good life expectancy, where you can actually recommend TPN. Not for patients who are advancing and days to weeks to live, and where they are already suffering from a lot of fluid overload by feeding and everything. Next slide. So in summary, the patients with bowel obstructions require evaluation, and you have to understand where exactly they are in the disease trajectory, and then set goals, and then decide how aggressively we should address these symptoms. Pain, nausea, and vomiting, everything can be addressed by medications, not by orally all of the time. So parenterally, sublingually, transdermally, or rectally. And if patients, and it is very important to talk to the caregivers, because they need to administer medications most of the time in terms of bowel obstruction. So we can train them to give all these medications at home. Yeah. So I can take a few questions if there is time, or maybe after the presentation, whichever.
Thank you, Sridevi. I think we can take a few questions and then move forward. Anybody?
So I have seen a question in the chat. How far the non-pharmacological management are going to be effective? Non-pharmacological management can be, I must say, an adjunct to your drugs that you are giving. It's not about just giving drugs and relieving constipation, but you can tell them to, suppose a patient is ambulatory and or patient is able to eat or drink properly. So then I may tell them to eat or drink. If the patient is unable to drink, I generally don't tell them to have a fiber-rich diet and all, because then they struggle to have all this. They already have all this nausea and vomiting, and then they can't drink or eat enough. So it depends on how far the patient can do it, the non-pharmacological management. But the very important thing is disconnect the relationship between diet and the bowel opening. Not eating, so not opening bowel, that is fine. So that disconnection and unlearning is the first thing that I would stress upon.
Any more questions about constipation or bowel obstruction? So Dr. Sandeep mentions that Ranitidine has banned. Anybody else has anything to say about that? So there was a big discussion in 2019, which was going about banning of Ranitidine. In US they have banned, but I don't think in India we have banned. In USA they banned because they found that some impurities, that is nitrosamine, which is supposed to be a carcinogenic, was found in one of the um, brands of Ranitidine. But in India, the Drug Controller General of India has issued a notice to all the state drug controllers asking to check the brand, asking to check whether there is more amount of nitrosamine. So I see, I think it is not banned in India, it is still in the market.
There is a question on dependence on laxatives when they are on drug related. So can we actually say to dependence, because you are giving drugs which can actually cause constipation? So you need to relieve that constipation, right? So most often when you stop the drug which is constipating, they come back to their normal bowel. They don't generally get habituated to the thing. You are giving something which is obstructing the propulsion. So then you have to compensate it with something to stimulate the bowel movement. So I don't think that can be called as a dependence to the laxatives. Not in the context of cancer or opioid related constipation. So what is a routinely prescribed laxative would be a combination of a stimulant and a softener. So first visit, we can add a stimulant and check if the patient is already having a constipation. I would add the softener in the beginning itself, but if not, I'll wait for the next visit. Usually they'll be okay with just a stimulant. Some patients would need a softener also.
What is the management of piles and fistula? That was another question. I think if anybody want to comment on that, please comment. Any surgeons in the group? What is the management of piles and fistula? That was the question. Any surgeons?
Dr. Sunila, can I, with my experience, I can.
Yes, please.
I'm not a surgeon, but by the.
Yeah, okay.
Fistula is a false tract which connecting the rectum and the perineum area. We need to have it resected. The false tract has to be taken care of by surgical procedure. And the piles, obviously the inflammation, the venous plexus has been inflamed and engorged. That's the reason there's a painful defecation that leads to secondary constipation because of pain. Patient is not passing the stools properly at a given time due to he or she experiences the pain. To overcome, we have to give her the patient the softener than the stimulant. Softener will be first thing. And local edema and inflammation has to be taken care of. The proctitis part has to be taken care of. That's my experience.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Sandeep. Dr. Anupama asked, stimulant laxatives, can we prefer oral tab? So, Dr. Anupama, can you explain more about that? I didn't get the question because most of the laxatives are given orally. So, it is Bisacodyl or sodium picosulfate or Senna. All these are stimulant laxatives which are given orally. So, is that what you want to know or something else? Dr. Anupama?
You can't communicate. Hello.
Yes, Dr. Anupama. Yeah, I just.
Yeah. So Bisacodyl is available as tablet, whereas sodium picosulfate is available as syrup, and it is also available as in combination with liquid paraffin. But Senna is available as tablet. I don't think there is syrup.
So we can use either way.
Yes, you can use.
Okay.
There is a question on when to use bulk forming laxative. It is generally not preferred because you know how it works and what is the cause of constipation. I've used bulk forming laxative only in one patient who was telling post surgery she has the stool consistency is very watery, and every now and then she's working in a bank, so every now and then she had to have bowel opening, and then it worked because I gave a bulk forming laxative. It formed the bulk and it took some more of a transit time to reach. So then she could take breaks at a longer time, and that helped actually to delay the transit time. That is the only time I've used bulk forming laxative, but otherwise not good for in our patient, because you can think how it acts and why there is a constipation. Yeah, I was just mentioned. There is one question again on bulk forming. I can't see the chat.
So bulk forming laxatives, the examples are methyl cellulose or Ispagola husk. So when you mix it with water, and you will ask the patient to immediately drink that solution. But if you keep it long time without immediately with immediate consumption, what happens is this will be in hard in consistency. So those who are taking bulk forming laxatives should drink a lot of water. Otherwise, they will have more constipation. So bulk forming laxatives are not a drug of choice for patients who are taking laxatives or who are bedridden, etc. So it is not usually used in palliative care.
There is a question on diabetic neuropathy related constipation, whether it is a stimulant or a softener preferred. In those cases, even the prokinetics usually work. A combination of a prokinetic will also help in enhancing the motility, because the nerve supplying to that particular area is affected. So it's mainly a neurologic issue than more like a pseudo obstruction. Prokinetic and a stimulant can work. If they are telling that the stools are really hard, it's not, now I am able to pass, but they are really hard, then I would add a soft.
Okay, I think we can move on to patient story. So Rajalakshmi, can you share the patient story? So Dr. Deepak will be presenting the patient story today.
Dr. Deepak. Dr. Deepak, please unmute yourself.
In the last 7 days, and also the complaint of constipation since 3 days, with loss of appetite and weight loss since 2 months. And patient is a known case of hypertension and type 2 diabetes mellitus, very well compliant with his drugs. So then on the history of illness is the patient having a known case of hypertension and type 2 diabetes mellitus with complaints of gastric outlet obstruction with severe vomiting and dysphagia, which aggravated in last 7 days, and the loss of appetite and weight loss since 2 months. And then he, because of his condition, on UGI endoscopy, it was visible that the gastric outlet obstruction. He was admitted and planned for surgery. Then on examination, patient is very thin, lean and malnourished. Weight is 48.5 kg, height 154 centimeter, with BMI of 20.45, and patient is conscious, oriented, febrile and severely dehydrated, and having severe pallor with clubbing present. When he presented to us, the BP was 90, diastolic BP is 60, pulse rate of 110 per minute, and the respiratory rate is 24 per minute. And then SpO2 is 96% on room air. The respiratory system, there is decreased air entry on the right side, and the rest, the CVS examination and CNS examination is quite good, and there is no abnormality detected. On per abdominal examination, it is soft, non-distended, non-tender, with succussion splash present, and the bowel sounds sluggish with no organomegaly. patient was apparently asymptomatic till the mid of June 2020. Later, he developed dysphagia and severe vomiting along with the gastric outlet obstruction, which got aggravated in last 7 days. He was admitted and planned for surgery due to his condition. Initial investigation were hemoglobin 14.4 gram per deciliter and total leukocyte count 8,500 and platelet count 2,84,000. RBS random blood sugar is 133 milligram per deciliter. Serum creatinine 1.4, sodium 126, potassium 4.7, and the calcium 1.3. His BP and blood sugar were under control, and his type 2 diabetes mellitus and hypertension drugs were put on hold, and patient underwent a partial distal gastrectomy for his problem, and the gastrojejunal anastomosis with feeding jejunostomy was done on 4th of July this year, and the histopathology examination of the sample that was sent, so it was suggestive of moderately differentiated adenocarcinoma with the tumor infiltrating the muscularis mucosa and reaching the perigastric region. And the stage was third A, that is T4 and T4A, nodal stage 2, and the metastasis is not detected. So post surgery, he received 1 cycle of chemotherapy, and he developed right-sided pleural effusion. Therapeutic tap was done, and the sample was sent for CB naught, which came as MTB not detected. And around 1,000 ml of fluid was drained, following which he felt better and was breathing little better. I have X-ray. And that was during when he presented to us in emergency. This is the, you can see this X-ray. We have X-ray abdomen and the chest X-ray. Hello.
Yes, doctor. We can hear you.
Hello.
Hello, doctor.
So then the patient was feeling little better. He was being fed through the feeding jejunostomy tube and orally too. And the family and the patient was counseled about his health condition and also about how to feed him through the feeding jejunostomy tube. The main concern about the constipation is here the patient was first when he presented, he was also suffering from the constipation, then the surgery related the ileus. This is also the constipation, and the further on feeding through feeding jejunostomy tube. So these are my question which I want to raise. Then the patient was after receiving first cycle of chemotherapy and the draining this pleural fluid, patient was feeling better, and he was counseled regarding the feeding jejunostomy tube and about the disease and the disease progression and the condition. Then next slide, please. Next. So this is the this X-ray. The last X-ray was the pleural effusion after receiving the first cycle of chemotherapy, and on doing the therapeutic drain, the patient feels little better, and he was doing better. The next slide. So patient was known case of hypertension and type 2 diabetes mellitus and taking his medication properly. So when I asked patient, or when I asked about the condition of the patient to the then he asked me first thing which is more of a psychological social concern. He said, I am very well compliant with my drugs, still why this problem happened to me, and he was very much worried about this thing when we tell him about his disease, that the gastric outlet obstruction or the severe vomiting, and this thing he had is because of his gastric CA. So he is farmer by profession and living in a family of 9 members, and already diagnosed with hypertension and type 2 diabetes mellitus, and his concern was how he can develop those problems, asking that he know about communicability of tuberculosis and well aware about his diabetic condition. but how to answer his complaint regarding the cancer related gastric outlet obstruction, and how to ensure about the disease in patient about such condition. And we did the counseling about the feeding jejunostomy tube also. Please next slide. Then medication that was given during at the when he presented to us, we stopped his antihypertensives and the diabetes medication, and was operated on 4th of July. We give him IV fluids and the antibiotics and the all other these medication we have provided. When the patient was little stabilized, then we started patient on the first cycle of chemotherapy, that is IV fluids with along with cisplatin and taxolione and the furosemide and these ranitidine and chlorpromazine, firstofall calcium. After 1 month, the patient stayed with us for 20 days, and when he started feeling very good, then we discharged him on the 4th of August. Next slide. Then my main concern is how to communicate about the illness when patient is already well compliant for 2 disease, that is his hypertension and type 2 diabetes mellitus. About the, I have seen many patients. The patient came with gastric outlet obstruction or the small intestine obstruction or the large bowel obstruction, because the neglected behavior towards the disease is very common in settings of ours. So how to communicate about him, how to communicate this thing to the patient, that when they have to present to clinics, or this thing is very common. Then the concern about the feeding jejunostomy tube in the initial course post-op, and how to explain this thing to the patient, and the role of local language for the communication. For example, I joined newly and I'm seeing a lot of cases which are chronic cases and related to the obstruction and on the constipation. So I want to ask this question from the faculty also, how to deal with this situation. Next slide, please. So summary is a 61-year-old known case of hypertension and type 2 diabetes mellitus, well compliant on his drug, and BP and blood sugar well controlled, brought to the ER with complaints of recurrent vomiting on eating. UGI endoscopy was suggestive of malignancy in the distal stomach. Patient undergone distal gastrectomy with G2 resection with feeding jejunostomy. He had developed delirium post-op due to hypokalemia and hyponatremia, which was corrected, and patient well recovered. And the drain was removed on post-op day 5, orally allowed on post-op day 4, starting on the first cycle of chemotherapy, and developed right-sided pleural effusion. Therapeutic drain was done, and the patient recovered very well. Next slide, please. So the point about which I am concerned more, the patient concerned about the disease, and the especially managing the chronic illness like cancer along with the hypertension and type 2 diabetes mellitus with having a BMI of 20. This patient is having little bit good BMI, I will say, because I have seen many patients here having the BMI of less than 15, 14, 13 and even 12, and having the very severe condition like GI cancers along with the this lean diabetes. So how to communicate with the patient regarding this thing, and about his surgical condition, and also about his further chemo cycles. Next. So thank you. This was my case regarding the gastric outlet obstruction, and I have questions, constipation that was present initially and after surgery, and so.
So this patient had feeding jejunostomy, isn't it?
Yes.
Dr. Deepak?
Yes, yes. Hello?
Yeah, I don't, can you take the summary?
Yes, this is the summary of the patient presented to us in the ER with complaints of recurrent vomiting on eating. And when on UGI, that is upper and GI endoscopy, it was suggestive of malignancy in the distal stomach. And patient undergone distal gastrectomy with D2 resection with feeding jejunostomy. He had developed delirium post-op due to hypokalemia and hyponatremia, and it was corrected with fluids, and he was well recovered, and the drain removed on the post-op day 5. And the patient allowed for oral feeds on post-op day 4, and he started on first cycle of chemotherapy after the patient condition was very well stable. And after chemotherapy, he developed right-sided pleural effusion. That X-ray I showed, or is present in this case I added. And then therapeutic drain was done, and after that patient recovered well. So what
So,
can
Dr.
be, my
Dr.
question
Deepak,
is, yes,
he has a feeding jejunostomy and he is taking orally also,
yes.
both.
We started so that he can
Okay.
develop slowly.
Uh-huh. Okay,
That
okay.
was
I was
that
confused
is my,
about that.
no, that is my concern. The main concern, my main concern is the constipation. He's suffered from two type of constipation basically. One was he had because of gastric outlet obstruction during the presentation of the disease, and the another one that is most probably related to the post-op ileus, or we can say. So how to communicate this thing to the patient? It means regarding in simple words, because in medical jargon we can understand what is the pathophysiology behind his condition, but how to communicate to the patient?
About the ileus
Yes, about
or
this
about the
constipation
disease?
thing. Yes.
Okay, okay. Okay. So, anybody want to comment on this? How can you communicate the problem of constipation to the patient in simple words? What language do you speak, Dr. Deepak?
Here the patient usually, this is the Chhattisgarh region, so patient speak the Chhattisgarhi language, but I understand this language, but I usually I speak in Hindi to the patient.
So patients understand Hindi?
They understand little bit, around the 50 to 60% of words they can understand, but sometimes it had difficulty when the patient is from very far regions, from the inside of the sub-center, that we have 3 sub-centers and patients are coming from those places.
Yeah, Dr. Chadna Agarwal says that you can take the help of the staff who is the local person. So that is
So how to, I mean, how to patient is feeling like that before coming here, he also the complaints of constipation, and now after surgery is also the having the complication, complaint of the constipation. So how to reassure patient about this thing?
okay. Any opinion regarding this? Anybody?
Because patient usually are not educated, or I mean to say usually they are illiterate, or they are working in fields, or living in villages. So we had a lot of patients in setting of ours. So my main concern, how to communicate regarding this, the pathophysiology, not the this thing, communication. Because in communication we can take help from the staff, from the local people, but the patient was more worried about the constipation that is present before when he presented to us, and also when he operated. So this thing, how to communicate this thing to the patient?
Sridhari? Yeah,
So,
Dr. Susan says
sorry.
diagrams would be helpful.
Yeah, that's what I was about to tell. Because when I was working in Karnataka, I had the same problem of the language thing, where I cannot speak the language, but I can understand. Diagrams help a lot. You don't complicate the diagrams, but just draw a stomach, which is like a pouch where you store your food in a pouch. So when you have so sometimes patients tell early satiety after a surgery. So we can tell the pouch is very, very smaller now. You can't fill in more things that you were filling in before. So that is why you feel early satiety. So from the pouch, there is a long tube. What happens? What happened initially when the tumor was there? The tube opening had a obstruction, and then you removed it. So draw, or if it is a common problem, make a small, if you have a personal laptop in your OP room or a personal computer, you can just make a good animated moving kind of things, or you can just a diagram to show. So when they see it, whatever illiterate or poor background they come from, they very clearly understand, using the small terms like a pipe or a pouch or a bag, and then draw and show. That works really well. Then you can tell them how the block was happening before surgery because there was a tumor, and show that how you removed the tumor or a part of your stomach. So what happened to the stomach now? What happens to the adhesions, or what happened when there is an ileus? So you can explain by diagram or showing it in your personal computer.
Yes, thank you, ma'am, for explaining this thing.
Or even
I
your
will try.
mobile, because you'll have your mobile, right? So make something. It is a very common problem.
Yes.
So I learned it from another radiation oncologist there, because everyone asks whether the radiation burns skin. Are you going to give a current shock? So he has made a nice animation in one slide, which is there in his phone also. So whenever patient comes for radiation, he start with the animation. Okay, this is what is going to happen. This is how radiation is done. So there is a small 3-4 slides he makes, and then he explains. So there is no language barrier. They are seeing what you are telling.
Okay. Oh yes, I will try this next time whenever I will see other cases or the similar cases.
So, what is your question about hypertension and diabetes mellitus, Dr. Deepak?
That the patient is taking various drugs, or the patient was more concerned like about the diet pattern and the drugs he is getting. The patient was getting glimepiride and metformin for his diabetes, and amlodipine for hypertension. So my question is, uh, uh, for example, we see patient of very low BMI, around the mean BMI is usually from 11 to 15, and then patient are taking those drugs, and the patient usually they feel that they're having various complaints regarding, they feel like these complaints like constipation is because of the drug side effects. But as a medical student, or as a PG student, I know this is not because of the drug side effect, or this is because of his condition, that is gastric outlet obstruction. But patient usually feel this thing is because of his drug, and they stop drugs by themselves. So how to communicate this thing that this is not because of the drug?
Yeah, I think Sridevi, you can try to answer that.
Did they already had a session on communication, or is it
Yeah,
yet to
yeah,
come?
it's over.
Okay, so it's all about repeating whatever you are thinking. Every single time they will come back with the same complaint. No, this medications has caused all this. So they keep titrating on their own. But
Yes.
I think we must be patient enough to repeat it every time they come, and why it is being managed, why this is not related to this. Does this patient know that he has an advanced cancer? Because looking at his condition with a huge pleural effusion and stuff, prognosis
Yes.
seems to be
The
so
thing
he
is,
knows that he has.
in villages, in places like our, patient usually present when the things get very very less manageable medically, or if manageable surgically, then we have to do a lot of our efforts, and patient need huge surgeries. So this is very common problem.
So very often they will be relating this to the medications because they need answers. See, all of us need answers. Why this happened? Is it because of that? Is it because of this? So lot of questions that they have in mind, and the easier way is to connect why this happened, because I'm taking this medication or allopathic medication. I did that, I did this. So they won't answer why this happened to me, and it may have deeper meanings than that we expect. But it is important to repeat every single visit that why do you think that this medication can cause this? Have you ever heard about those kind of complications? Have anyone told you about this? So I think that is the way, repeating in simple language and be patient whenever
Yeah,
this
and compliance is another problem which you have told, for which we
Yes,
have to
yes.
talk about the complications that can occur, and even you can relate it to some other patients in the ward or nearby him, and tell that this is because of he has not taken any medication for hypertension or diabetes mellitus, and that's why you see many patients with one-sided paralyzed. Uh, so those all are things that you can tell the patient so that they can relate what will happen if they don't take the medications properly. And Chaitanya Agarwal has given a beautiful sentence that patient can also be
yeah,
explained that
that is
the
very
cause of
reasonable.
constipation is due to bowel taking rest to heal well. I think that's very good language.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, very easy to understand. Anyone can understand, and it just makes sense to the patient. Okay, at least something good is happening.
Yes, but here we have to do a lot of our efforts to explain patient each and everything, and we because patients are from very backward areas here, so the thing to explain them, this is very difficult at times.
Dr. Sandeep?
Yeah, Dr. Sunil, thanks. I would like to just share my ideas with all the forum and with Dr. Deepak, like what I could understand his main concerns, how as a medical practitioner he communicate to this patient who's in so much dilemma he's having. He came with the constipation and still the constipation is there and he's not properly continuing his medication, and that's what. So my first, I would like to inquire and explore about his idea, what his understanding, where he stands in the medical disease process and socially also. At we need to come down to level of his expertise than our expertise and talk at their level. Understand there's a problem in communication because of the language barriers, which will take care of, as Dr. Shirdevi also said, the diagrams and other will help non-communicable cues and verbal rather than verbal cues to be taken and help of the other colleagues. Before we assess his curiosity and his where he stands, what he wants to know, we can proceed further from there. Just trying to communicate to him directly, is this because of this? Does he know that he's having cancer? Then our path ways changes accordingly what he wants to know and where he wants to go further. And we can explain in that simple language. If he doesn't know before that he had a cancer, or he doesn't know even after surgery he had a cancer and what was had happened during the hyponatremia, hypokalemia itself is a process of paralytic ileus and constipation, we need to explain to them. Unless we are able to go down to their level, it is difficult. It's a practice and every day different for every patient. So one size doesn't fit everybody. So that's my take on what I could gather the discussion. Dr. Deepak wanted to go further.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. It helped me a lot, and I will try next time on the coming cases if I'll get such type of cases.
Sridevi, can you continue with the session? I have another meeting.
Happening. Yeah,
Okay, you
sure.
can finish it.
Yeah.
Now it's 4:40, and the last two questions have to be
Yeah,
answered.
yeah. Sure. I'll do it. Okay, so there is Dr. Chetana telling that to explain in because he's a farmer, he may understand in a better way that when they sow the seeds, it take time to bear plants. Similarly, so after our operation, it will take time to get the effect. Just a word of caution, because he has a progressive illness. So by the time he start having the flowers and fruits, his symptoms may actually worse. So that is a slightly tricky way, I must say. But yeah, basically the essence what Dr. Chetana is trying to convey is that use their own examples from their life, who they are. So whenever you're talking to a farmer, use their language so that they understand it in a better way. Thank you, Dr. Chetana. Is there any other question before we wind up today's session?
Thank you, ma'am. These were all my questions. So it helped me a lot regarding understanding the disease process and to communicate with the patients having such a chronic complication of the disease.
Thank you so much, Doctor. Thank you. So I think that is about today's. If there is any other question, you can always email or put it in the WhatsApp group. We'll get back to you. So Arun has sent a feedback link in the chat session. You can just give your feedback before you log out. Thank you so much for your patient listening today.
Okay, thank you, Sridevi ma'am. Thank you, sir. And please fill the feedback till now. It's a request.